Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sandy Woodley, the president of University of Texas Permian Basin. It's great to welcome you here to this beautiful engineering facility in the heart of the Permian Basin. Today, you're here to talk about water and what an important topic that is. Now, UTPB is the home of the Texas Water and Energy Research Institute, and we also have a water conference hosted by Shepherd Leadership Institute that happens every year in February. So we hope you all will be able to be a part of that as well. You know, the Permian Basin is an entrepreneurial community, and we know that wildcatter spirit takes us far in this community. We're excited today to welcome you here for this wonderful conversation, and we hope you enjoy it. And thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Dr. Woodley, for your welcome, and our thanks to UT Permian Basin and UT Permian Basin Shepherd Leadership Institute for hosting today's conversation. My name is Matt Ewalt, and I serve the Texas Tribune as Director of Events and Live Journalism. On behalf of the Texas Tribune, I want to thank you all for being here today, both in person and online. As we gather in this space to discuss one of the many challenges facing our state, I'd like to start by acknowledging the violence that our state suffered this past weekend. We are mourning for the communities of Allen and Brownsville, and as part of the Tribune's mission, grounded in a more engaged, better informed, and more civically aware Texas, we will continue providing updates on these events as they relate to Texas politics and policy. Today's conversation is titled Broken Pipes: How We Can Keep Water Safely Flowing in Texas, and builds upon the journalism of my Tribune colleagues with their recent Broken Pipes series that documents the challenges Texas communities face maintaining aging water systems along with local and state solutions to keep Texas water safely flowing. I want to thank today's sponsors. Our major sponsors include Texas 2036, the Texas Association of Counties, Texas State Technical College, and Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas. Foundation sponsors for today's event include the Meadows Foundation, the Jacob and Therese Hershey Foundation, Energy Foundation, the Susan Vaughn Foundation, the Berdine Johnson Foundation, Shield Heirs Foundation, Texas Rural Funders, Emerson Collective, the TLL Temple Foundation, and the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation. Though corporate sponsors and donors underwrite this event, they play no role in determining the content, speakers, or line of questioning. As of today, tickets are on sale for the Texas Tribune Festival happening in Austin, September 21st through 23rd. Buy them by May 31st and save big. You can learn more at tribfest.org. And the Tribune is committed to community-based reporting and the convening of community events like this. In turn, we ask the community to help fund our work. More than 10,000 people support the Tribune as members. Will you join them? Our spring member drive ends this Friday, and we invite you to make a tax-deductible donation at texastribune.org/donate. Now to join. Thank you in advance for your support. And just some housekeeping notes about today's event. We'll have approximately 40 minutes of conversation with our panel, moderated by my colleague Jayme Lozano-Carver, South Plains and Panhandle reporter for the Texas Tribune. Then 15 minutes for audience questions. Know that with our video and the conversation, we may run a little past 1 o'clock, so please carve out a few minutes if we do go over. Also ask that you silence your cell phones, and if you would like to tweet from this event, you can use the hashtag #TTEvents. And before we do turn it over to our panel, we're going to show a brief video interview conducted by Nick Garcia, Regions Editor for the Texas Tribune, with Tom Bailey, Public Works Director for the City of Zavala, who is also featured in the Tribune's Broken Pipes series.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nick Garcia, the Regions Editor at the Texas Tribune. I'm joined today by Tom Bailey, the Public Works Director for the City of Zavala in East Texas. And we're talking about water infrastructure, an issue my team has been covering for the last several months. Tom, thanks for joining us. I'm curious, as the Public Works Director, what do you wake up thinking about every morning when it comes to water infrastructure?
I just wake up praying there's no catastrophe, that we don't have a water leak.
And what happens if you do have a water leak? Walk us through a typical day.
Well, the typical day we have is pretty routine. Every day is the same day, over and over, Monday through all the way to Sunday, 7 days a week. So we get up first thing in the morning and we check. We have 5 lift stations that we check on the sewer side. Then we have our wastewater treatment plant that we check on our sewer side. On the water side, we have 3 well locations. And we check the chlorine levels in those wells. We check the pH of those wells, and we check the pumps and water levels.
Why? So Zavala, came to our attention at the Texas Tribune because of a boil water notice over Thanksgiving, which we thought was fairly extraordinary. But as we talked with folks in your neighborhood and city and in other parts of rural Texas, boil water notices can be pretty regular, frequent. There's often issues with water infrastructure crumbling and breaking. Why is that? Why is the water infrastructure, particularly in East Texas and some rural areas of the state, not doing well right now? Why is it in disrepair?
It's the age of the system. This system was put in the late 50s, early 60s. So aside from pumps that have been replaced periodically as they needed to be, the infrastructure itself is that old. So anytime you take, and our storage tanks are all steel, they're lined with a liner on the inside, a spray-on a 2-part liner. But those liners over time break down, and if you ever get one little crack in a liner and you get water touching bare metal, of course you have rust and corrosion, and it starts from there, and it just gets worse and worse. In our case, and it's the same as a lot of small towns throughout everywhere, is that over time, we've had our water rates set at a specific level, if you will. Over time, we're all neighbors. We're country people, so even if you live across town, we're still a neighbor. We treat you like the guy that lives next door. So over time, the city council has not elected to increase water rates because they're looking out for their constituents. That's completely understandable. However, during that time frame, our infrastructure continually broke down, and we're in the position we are now. We don't have the money to fix it, and our water rates were still low until here recently.
So as we reported in our series Broken Pipes, the city of Zavala did recently raise the rates for water in Zavala. I'm curious, how big of an impact is that going to be for you?
It's going to be a pretty good impact. It's increased our revenue anywhere between $3,000 to $5,000 a month. That $3,000 to $5,000 a month is set aside in a contingency plan. And when the time comes, if we need a pump or we have a major break, something that cost quite a bit of money to repair, we'll have those funds set aside instead of as we were before this year. We had $0 set aside, and we were working month to month on a monthly budget, paycheck to paycheck, if you will.
As you noted, the issues in Zavala are not only happening across Texas, but across the nation. But we're the Texas Tribune, so we're really curious about what's going on in our own backyard. What do you want lawmakers who are currently right now debating a major spending package for water infrastructure to know? And how much help do you need from Austin right now?
Well, the way it states right now, I need 2 above ground tanks. They're fairly small tanks. They're about 20,000 gallons apiece. Those tanks are $30,000 a piece to set. My water tower is crumbling, not literally falling down, but we have rust that's throughout the whole water tower, and we have small leaks that are beginning. So if you stand under our water tower, you'll get a drop of water on your head. Those things cost a lot of money. A water tower right now costs anywhere from $1.5 to $5 million to build. That's a lot of money for a community like us. Those would be the things I would be reaching out for. We, along with a lot of other small towns, rural areas, we have concrete asbestos pipe, which was outlawed years ago. but it wasn't outlawed to the extent of if you have it in the ground, you have to dig it up. It was just outlawed as in they don't reproduce it anymore, and you can't install it as new water line. We have that. We would love to dig up and be able to replace, because the thought of drinking water that's going through anything with asbestos in it is scary to everyone, right? So we would love to be able to replace that. That costs a lot of money.
Money isn't the only issue when it comes to getting things done in Austin. It also takes a lot of political willpower. What do you think the average Texan who is concerned about their own water infrastructure should be doing right now to ensure that lawmakers, city council members, county commissioners address this issue? Be heard.
Go vote. Go to your city council meetings. Go to your county commissioner meetings. Go to legislation. Send letters. Go in person to your congressmen and your representatives to be represented. If you don't vote and you don't do those things, then you're not represented, and they'll take their time and focus on other issues and not water.
Tom Bailey, the Public Works Director for the City of Zavala, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, man.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jayme Lozano-Carver, the South Plains and Panhandle reporter for the Texas Tribune's Regions team, which also has a reporter based out in Lufkin in East Texas. And coming in July, we will have a reporter based out here in the Permian Basin. Let's begin today's panel conversation titled Broken Pipes, How We Can Keep Water Safely Flowing in Texas. And I will start by introducing our panelists. First, we have Ector County Judge Dustin Fawcett. Dustin is a sixth-generation Texan and a proud Odessa native who took office in January 2023. He has also served the city of Odessa on the Traffic Advisory Committee and the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee. Carlos Rubinstein is the principal member of RSA H2O LLC, an environmental consulting firm with a strong emphasis on water issues. Appointed by Governor Rick Perry, Rubinstein also served as chairman of the Texas Water Development Board from 2013 to 2015, and during his tenure, he oversaw the implementation of the $2 billion State Water Infrastructure Fund for Texas. Dr. Melanie Barnes is a senior research associate in the Department of Geosciences at Texas Tech University. Barnes has served as a member and co-chair of the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality Pollution Prevention Advisory Committee, and she is a member of the Region O Llano Estacado State Water Planning Board, the Interregional Water Planning Committee at TWDB, and the Citizens Water Advisory Committee of Lubbock. And Omar L. Martinez. He is the Grants and Strategic Initiatives Manager for El Paso's Economic and International Development Department. A 2021 graduate of the Texas Water Leaders Program, Martinez is a founder of Box Model Data, Inc., a consulting firm that includes projects in water resources development, conservation and reuse, flood mitigation, and waterfront recreational trail projects. I want to get started today by explaining why we're talking about water. It is easy to take for granted, as millions of Texans, including everyone in this room and watching online, expect clean water to flow out when we turn on the taps every day. As simple as that expectation is, the reality has become a lot more complicated than that. Population growth, climate change, and aging infrastructure have all taken a toll on Texas's water supply. As a result, many areas of Texas are facing various water issues. East Texas has seen an onslaught of boil water notices in recent years, while West Texas is losing water rapidly. And the forgotten colonias don't have water infrastructure at all. Then there's the little fact that in 2021, the state lost 132 billion gallons of water. And we did the math, and that is enough to fill the AT&T Stadium 170 times over. State lawmakers have taken notice, which we'll talk about today, as well as solutions that have surfaced from communities across the state. Tackling this massive problem is a team effort because, as we now know, it takes a lot to get safe drinking water from the pipes underground to our faucets. And speaking of faucets, Dustin, how are you?
I'm wonderful, thank you.
Dustin, I wanted to start with you because a lot of our coverage really started last summer whenever the Odessa water line, whenever the water line in Odessa broke. I want to hear from each of you about your respective regions and the water issues that y'all are seeing. And so, Dustin, can you start with Ector County?
Sure. So the incident, the catastrophic failure that we saw last summer was a unique one. Not in the fact that we saw a leak. We have leaks all the time. I think the past 2 years we've had over 90 leaks. The challenge that we saw this time was a failure of the valve system to be able to essentially quarantine that leak. Had we been able to successfully quarantine that leak and block that line off, we would have been fine. So really, when that valve was no longer functioning, that's when we really encountered a situation. And that's why we saw that we had to flush the system, essentially evacuate, I think it was 20 million gallons of water, and go through that whole process, which then pushed back timetables onto then, putting water back into the system and all of the environmental hazards that go with that, and making sure that folks can safely bathe and everything else, and a lack of water pressure. Something we do want to remind folks is, we were only without water for a relatively short period of time when it took to evacuate the water. A majority of the time, it was low pressure due to the fact that we were trying to get all of the water system back up and flowing. So really, it was that particular valve situation that was the most cumbersome and what really challenged us significantly. I do think that our folks worked as quickly as they could. We got some folks out of DFW to come out and to really fix the situation. But even then, whenever you fix the situation, you still have a whole lot of water to replace in the system. And so it was a challenge citywide. It was a challenge countywide. We have a very unique utility district, Ector County Utility District, that provides water to West Odessa residents. And they were impacted from this as well. Because they are also tied into the same water plant that we have in the city of Odessa. So it really was an Ector County-wide problem. That's why I applaud the mayor. He gave me a call as soon as he found out about the leak, kept me in the loop, and granted, I wasn't in office at the time. But he did want to keep me informed, and we stayed in constant communication, informed the public. And we saw a tremendous amount of support from the public in terms of bottled water. We had to turn away folks at times, but we set up stations throughout the entire city, throughout the entire county, for folks to go and find this drinking water. We didn't want to have anybody without it. We had no cases where we saw any lack of hydration throughout the county. And so our communities rallied tremendously. It's something that since that time, I've worked with our new emergency management coordinator, who we just appointed in the past 2 months to take on these issues. And that way we have a good system in place as to what we do when these type of events happen again. And part of that is the recovery. It is where do you get the water when these things happen? While Public Works is working on these things, what do we do in the meantime to provide for these folks? And it was a challenging time. There were folks who, we were a stinky town for a while. We didn't have anywhere to go for a shower. Fortunately, I'm friends with our sheriff. Our sheriff's also on a water well. He lives in the city of Odessa, but he also has a water well. And he offered me to come over and my wife and my 2 little girls to come shower over there. So we were fortunate. But we saw that throughout the whole community. On Facebook, people were saying, we're on water well, come on out, let us know. So the community really rallied. And so it could have been much worse had it not been for some quick action from our Public Works folks and then also from the community.
That's amazing to hear. Carlos, would you like to tell us about your region?
Well, I've been focused on that question about my region. My region is really the whole state. I've always been worried about and have worked on water concerns statewide and water policy. I currently live in Austin, but I grew up in the Rio Grande Valley. So the Rio Grande Valley is home to me, and it has its unique challenges. This is the fastest growing area by population in the state, even before the border problems that we're having now and the sad situation that occurred down there. The valley grew up around irrigation districts. It gets its water from irrigation districts, and it is inextricably linked to one source, the Rio Grande. Within it, you have communities have developed around the irrigation districts, and they're well supplied as long as Mexico's complying with the treaty. But we also had explosive development of substandard subdivisions, what we commonly call colonias. These occurred 50s, 60s, 70s. Unscrupulous developers, because there's no other word for it, went ahead and subdivided land, sold the land, contract by deed. If you couldn't pay it, they would take it back and offered you nothing of a service, no roads, no infrastructure whatsoever. Coming out of college, I did a health needs assessment. I was part of a study that did an assessment of what it meant from a public health standpoint to live in a colonia. And of course, we ended up very quickly focused on the provision of water and the ability to get rid of your wastewater. And we saw a marked increase in communicable diseases because of the lack of those services. The state responded and has done an admirable job since the 80s. We adopted what is known as the EDAP program, the Economically Distressed Areas Program, where we take money that the state sets aside, there's no federal money in this, and has historically provided up to 90% grants for colonias to be able to address their issues. And many colonias have. But unfortunately, you're in El Paso, you know this as well, we still have areas in Texas, not just along the border, that still today do not have first-time water or first-time sewer. And it's unconscionable to me to know that we're in 2023. And when we're talking about water policy in Texas, one of the hardest fights is where are we going to get additional money for these type of activities? Relative to the rest of Texas, my concern is water supply, water availability. We're having explosive growth statewide. We have a phenomenal state water planning effort, one that serves as a model for the country. We're not so great at implementing projects yet, but we're getting better. We are. Every decade that goes along that we still have something in the books, but we're really not moving to build, makes the situation worse for us down the road. Coupled with all of that and the explosive growth is that the fact that our existing sources of water, be they surface water or groundwater, are declining. So even if we did not have more people move into Texas, and of the 1,000 people that move to Texas a day, there's not one of them that's bringing their water with them, our own supplies are also diminishing. And so we need to worry about those issues.
I'm Melanie Barnes, and you guys made me think about a lot of things. I'm living in Lubbock, Texas. I've been there for 40 years. Water's been one of my hobby issues. I'm actually really a geologist, but they kind of mesh. And I would say Lubbock has set a really good example of thinking ahead. Having sat on the Citizens Committee, having been involved in siting landfills and looking at playa lakes and all sorts of things like that, you can see that there are out there trying to think ahead. It's a matter of them getting a voice, getting a chance to talk to people who know how to do things, and then trying to implement. And I think conservation has always been, well, we'll think about that tomorrow. I mean, it's just been there for the last, 35 years. It's only now that I actually see it being talked about statewide. You actually see the conservation committees having some sway, being able to have more than just a footnote in the water plans. And Lubbock, in that respect, has done a very good job in that they actually have been putting their treated water back into a canyon lake system, and they finally got a ruling from the state that it's their water. They can take it all back. Every ounce that they put in there, they can have back. So they've set up a system. We still have one more lake to build, but it's in process, and now it's going through the government permitting process, and then you have to get, it has a TCEQ, we are working on it type issue right now. And once you get all those things in line, Lubbock will actually be able to be 100% recyclable minus evapotranspiration. And we have at least 7 feet a year that disappear, which if they form clouds and rain, then we're always, happy for that staying. But it's the sort of thing where they've been working on it, redoing the infrastructure, trying to get it so that they have pumps that go both directions. So if you only have water coming from the north, we get it from Roberts County and Lake Meredith. then you can pump it to the whole city, not just the north part of the city. If you only have water coming from Bailey County, which is out to the west, you can still get it through the whole city. And then our newest source is Lake Allen Henry to the east. So the city has been working on that. And along that line, they have put out to the citizens, we need a base rate of funding. And they did that years ago. They said, okay, we're going to start raising it. And of course, everybody complains, but you just keep, the committee just kept pushing, and the city council will say, well, we can't do $4 this year. How about we do $1? So, okay, well, next year we're going to ask for $4 again. So they just keep doing and have finally got people understanding that a base rate is needed, and your first 7,000 gallons is at a low rate because that's what people need. And if you go above that, you start paying more and more and more. If you're an industry that has a 4-inch pipe into your house instead of a 1/2 inch, then you pay more and more and more. And now we're working on the landscaping. So it's slowly happening in Lubbock. And I would say they're doing a good job. One thing they did that had us survive during the freeze was at 9/11, the city sat down and said, where are we vulnerable? And water was the first thing that came up. So they actually planned how the water pumping system could survive an electrical failure. And they put generators, propane generators, at every single pump in the system. And so when we saw we were going to have brownouts, they said, we're pulling the whole water system off of the electrical grid, and we will run it with propane. They knew they could do it. They knew they could run 4 days. And they did. And they went on the first day of the freeze, they went from 25 leaks to 625 leaks. Because they could maintain pressure, we didn't go to a boil water. Because they could maintain pressure, they could find the leaks and take care of them. So it was a real lesson to some of the smaller towns in the area. I know that San Angelo called Lubbock and said, can you please send your leak people to us, because we still have leaks. And this was a week and a half after the freeze. So I think in that respect, some people in Lubbock have really thought about it. The nice thing that's happening now is Lubbock is actually helping the surrounding rural communities. And one of the things that has come out of all the research that's been being done is that playa lakes actually recharge, despite what we used to think 40 years ago, but they don't recharge if they're not a functioning playa lake. So kudos to the state. They have put some money in the Parks and Wildlife to rehab playa lakes, because they want birds and they want little animals. So that's fine. You know, if we can do it for the birds and animals, it gives water to the people. And what you can do on a 4-acre playa lake, you can support a family in the panhandle with enough water to live. You can't irrigate your crops. You might be able to give your sheep a little bit of water or your cows a little bit of water. But you actually, if we can rehab the playa lakes that we have damaged and get them back to functioning, there is water on the high plains. Yes, we're mining it. We're mining that Ogallala Aquifer like crazy. Mm-hmm. I mean, basically the Ogallala Aquifer is 3 buried rivers. And if you are up on the shores, banks of that river, your water's going out faster than if you're in the channel. So that's what's happening. The farmers know this. I think what the state of Texas has to realize, and this goes, I think, for every rural area in Texas, you 26 million people that live in the big cities have to remember us million people on the high plains provide the ag, which is the second economic driver in Texas. Okay, we disappear, Texas is no longer like the 7th country in the world with their economics. So there is some obligation for the rest of Texas to put up the funds that were talked about so that the small cities can repair their systems and not be wasting water, so they can have pumps that continue and not be boiling their water. I think this is an important issue that needs to get out there. Up here, or I guess we're on the edge of it right now, up north of us, on the Ogallala, on top of the plains and everything, we have permits for 3 million cows, and there's only 1 million people. So cows drink water. If they're in a feedlot, they need 33 gallons a day. If they're milking, they need 55. If they're on the range, they need 12. So there needs to be assistance to our farming communities, farming and ranching, so they can use the water efficiently and the small towns around them have access to water. I think that's really important. I see Lubbock doing this. I see Lubbock helping small towns around us. And that's good because Lubbock is the elephant and they need to not stomp around. They need to help instead. One of the things I'm seeing now with solar and wind is there's the opportunity, and Floydada is doing this. I don't know if Levelland has started yet, but they are putting solar panels and windmills by their pumps for their wells. And if there's a playa lake nearby, they're buying the playa lake and they're rehabbing it. I know that Clovis in New Mexico and the Air Force Base out there have combined and they are rehabbing Playa Lake so they can be completely independent with regard to water and not have to pump so much out of the groundwater because they know they're running out and the military knows they're running out. So in that regard, the US government can be some assistance to some people if you've got a base or something near you. One thing that has happened that's been a real advantage is the Region O planning group combined with the South Plains Association of Governments, and it was like they got religion. They learned about water, and they are helping every small town they can in the Panhandle to go after grants and funding. So I think the programs that are going through the legislature right now that are putting aside money for infrastructure, we need to take full advantage of, and I think we need to take full advantage of what the feds are offering and use as much as we can in Texas, as much as we're allowed. We should not leave one penny on the table.
Absolutely. And of course, we know state lawmakers have a role to play here, and we'll get to that too. Omar, tell us about El Paso.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So whereas Mr. Rubinstein focused a lot of his career in policy work and designing the very same programs that we're all tapping into for grants and to develop the water infrastructure the state so desperately needs, my job now is to implement his legacy. And so I work in far West Texas and all along the US-Mexico border to do the nitty-gritty work that's required to get the state and federal dollars and implement them in these communities that need water infrastructure. So we're talking from ideation all the way to ribbon cutting, every step on the way. And in El Paso, the last 15 years have been perpetual drought conditions. We exist in drought all the time. And the interesting thing about El Paso as a case study is that what El Paso is today, where we're focusing on importation from a completely different watershed to recycled water, where what we call toilet to tap, using surface water, capturing stormwater and storing it in a reservoir for rapid reuse for irrigation. All of these strategies that are not necessarily implemented everywhere. El Paso's water story is pretty much what a lot of areas in Texas will be like in the next 50 years. And so one thing to look at, if anything, my presence here is look at El Paso, look at what we're doing. The El Paso water utilities and the city of El Paso and El Paso County are developing new technology, implementing AI to fund and solve a lot of our water issues. And so in the nitty-gritty work I do, the grant writing, we're talking federal dollars. We're trying to be as creative as possible. We tapped into the U.S. Economic Development Administration for tourism dollars to solve water issues in Van Horn. We are tapping into the EDAP program to solve water issues and provide first-time water and wastewater services to colonias in El Paso County. We're even working with our elected officials, both Republican and Democrat, through their community of project funding programs to prioritize water projects. And we're doing it in gentlemen's agreements. We know that there's a lot of priorities, but water in our region comes first. And these are handshakes that have been able to get us millions of dollars in federal aid to some of the most difficult water problems in our region, problems that don't necessarily compete well in federal and state problems. Obviously, when it comes to loan programs offered by the Texas Water Development Board, the finances matter the most. And so if a community can't pay back these dollars, does it mean that they can't get the water they need? And so that's where I come in, and that's where because smaller communities are struggling with their workforce and technical capacity to access these dollars, they're already at a disadvantage. And then they're trying to solve the most difficult water problems in Texas. And so getting experts from far away, whether it's like Water Finance Exchange to bring in their technical assistance to smaller communities, or universities and researchers trying to find ways to innovate and solve these water problems, we're doing everything we can to compete throughout the rest of Texas and throughout the nation to bring these dollars to our communities. And we've had a lot of success. Hopefully we get a chance to tell stories about some of our biggest success stories, and I'd be happy to share those on how El Paso and all of West Texas solves water problems.
And I'm glad you mentioned, the gentleman's agreement, because whenever we think about water, that is something that has been a contentious battle. That is not something that you would think could just be a handshake and everybody agree and move on. Tell us about those kind of conversations and how they go.
Sure. So El Paso County, you have the city of El Paso proper, which is the largest community in the county, and you have smaller communities, roughly 30,000 people or less. They're not technically suburbs because there's a significant distance from a lot of them. And so usually all of the technical expertise and the more ambitious funding programs are centered on the city proper. When I say gentleman's agreement, my instructions on the new city manager was go and be a diplomat. Go and talk to these communities and help them solve their water issues. The question at hand is, and in our case, what is an El Pasoan? Is it somebody that lives in city proper, that pays property taxes? Or is it somebody that works, plays, prays, sometimes heals in city? So our philosophy now is when they're in the city, that means they become El Pasoans. Whether they come from right across the border in Ciudad Juarez or further south into Mexico, or they're coming from even South America. The second they touch our jurisdiction, then they become one of us. And so with that paradigm shift, I'm sent out and I provide the technical assistance and write the grant applications for a lot of these communities. And that's a completely different mindset than we've had before. We're hoping that we can replicate that throughout the state. We have a lot of talent in cities that can be exported to smaller communities. And a lot of these projects I end up doing for free because there is no existing financial mechanism like the Texas Water Development Board or the federal government fund the grant application process. They fund administration once the grant is received, but to get to that point, it's an uphill battle. And so we're hoping that we can level the playing ground with our smaller communities by having the big cities provide that desperate technical assistance that these communities need and really solve the water issues throughout the state together.
And I know that y'all have worked, several of y'all have worked on water planning groups and that entire process, which can be really hard for, your average Texan to fully grasp. So what is something about planning for the future of water that y'all wish regular Texans knew?
Well, I'll jump in. Couple of things, and I'm going to react to a couple of the comments that were also made along the way. Yes, Texans after the drought of 1997 and then certainly 2011 got a little bit more focused on water conservation. But we really don't yet know what that means. Some people will say, when we're in a drought and when we implement drought stage 1, 2, or 3, we're going to tell you not to water these days or at these times. My firm belief is if all you're doing when you're trying to conserve water is to keep using it the same way you always did when you had it, you are not conserving. So you need to change what it is the way in which we are dealing with and utilizing our water. Every drop needs to count. Technical assistance, Omar brought it up. I couldn't agree with him more. There's a lot of organizations, not enough of them, but several, that are volunteering their time on their own nickel to be able to help these communities actually compete. We have great planning, to your question, but the ones that benefit from the entire effort are the entities that have the institutional resources to navigate the entire process. Isn't that right, Omar? Yeah, right. Okay, and so he is 100% correct. There is no funding yet on getting the smaller communities to be able to compete at an even level. But there's movement in the legislature right now that can help. The Senate Bill 28, for example, will provide money for technical assistance focused on rural Texans, focused on small communities below 150,000 or less, and focused on actual need. I think that that is needed. When we leave a community behind, whether it's a colonia or a community of 10,000 people that doesn't know how to navigate the process, all of Texans suffer. The last point I'll make, when we are planning, the fact is people live not necessarily where the water is at. And that is becoming more and more prevalent today. I was actually in Lubbock all of last week. We're trying to assist four subdivisions there that are in dire need as well. And I'll talk about that a little bit. But one of the things that we need to recognize is that water is going to move from where it is to where it isn't. When you do that, if you create a new unmet need from where you went to get the water from in the first place, Texas is losing. We cannot forget the area of origin. You made the point about agriculture. I was at a water conference one time and somebody was saying, well, agriculture needs to do a heck of a lot more to conserve water. They have. But the answer that was actually given, I wish I would have given it because it was such an eloquent answer, was by another gentleman. He said, so you say that ag is using too much water? And the lady was pounding the desk. Absolutely. Well, let's talk about agriculture. Who here last year had a lettuce between this month and this month? People raise their hand. Well, that lettuce came from this state during that time. Who here and he went on through all of them, and at the end of them, he said, and who here had an almond any time last year? And a lot of people were looking around. It's like, whoa, this guy's making some points. Raise their hands. I mean, I had a Snickers bar. I know there's almonds in it. So and the point he made is when you talk about agriculture, look in the mirror because all of us depend on it.
I think that if you're going to have people understand one thing, you are importing water into your house when you bring food into your house. That cow, he drank water every day before he became your beef. And I think that's something, I heard the same thing not long ago, and I thought, oh, wow, maybe this is how we can reach people to understand that we are moving water around all the time. If you take hay from Colorado and you feed some animal in northern New Mexico or northern Texas, you've just imported water. And that's the type of thing we don't think about. Some of the minutia that our Region O Water Committee has gotten into, and the industry has been happy to look for the figures. In fact, I would say how much water a beef or a cow or a milking cow or whatever needs, they have got it down now. Because when we asked that question at first, they said, oh, they all need 35 gallons a day. Well, it wasn't really true. And now they know. I think they follow them around and see how much they drink. But it makes us think about, do we change how we're doing things? And I see the farming community. I would say in the last 40 years, the agricultural community on the High Plains has gone from saying, I'm going to pump it till it's dry and I really don't care what the people after me do, to, and that was about 70 to 80% of them. It's very frustrating. To the fact that it's probably only about 20 to 30% now that say that. The rest of them say, I want my grandbabies to have this lifestyle if they want. And so they're looking for ways. But one person, if you start talking to a farmer and you see how much, I mean, you think your mortgage is bad. It's amazing what they have mortgaged out. And so it's not something that can change overnight. They're just individuals like you and me that have a certain amount of income and a lot of outgo. And so as people who eat and like the lifestyles we have, we need to be a contributor to their change. They cannot do it alone. So I think that's the one thing I would really like the people of Texas to understand. And I think it's very hard because I've spent a lot of time down in Austin on committees in the 90s and early 2000s. And you just kind of roll into that lifestyle and you don't really think about what's going on out in West Texas and places like that. So I think that's good. I think using our South Plains, like the South Plains Association, Government Association, that SPAG group has been amazing how quick they have gotten information out once they started becoming the administrator of Region O. Before that, it was kind of like in the boys club because one of the water districts was running it and nobody really knew about us. I mean, I would yak, yak, yak all the time, but my friends got tired of hearing it, so I needed a new audience. But I think something like the Texas Tribune doing this to get people to start thinking about, oh, I'm going to have an avocado. How much water was that, and where did it come from? Nothing wrong with trade. Nothing wrong with being to have your avocado when you want it. But think about the transfer. Part of that transfer is water.
And I think something that I'd like some of the folks, the viewers, to understand, and I would be remiss, especially here in the engineering to building here at UTPB, is the advancements that we've seen in water in terms of the oil and gas industry. You've been bragging a lot about the agriculture industry, but what we have going on in the oil and gas industry, if you go to the Permian Basin Water and Energy Conference, the inventions that these folks are doing is tremendous. The challenge is getting those evolutions from the oil and gas industry into the municipal industry. And how do we do that? Because it's a challenge because it's not cost effective on a small model. And so how do we bridge that gap to get it to a public-private partnership? That's where I'm trying to get us to. What people don't understand is we have a lot of water out here. We're a desert. We have a lot of water, but it's just very deep in the earth. We're on top of an ocean. And what people also don't understand, for every barrel of oil that we're pulling out of the ground in the Permian Basin, it's over 4 million barrels per day. We're pulling between 4 to 12 barrels of salt water out of the ground as well. And what are we doing with that water? Well, we're not recycling a majority of it. We're not even recycling really a fraction of it. We're shooting a lot of it back down into the earth, and we're seeing that there may be some causation there with the earthquakes that we're seeing. So how can we better utilize that water going forward? And because we're talking, 4 times 4 on the low, and that's 16 barrels of this brine salt water per day that we're producing. It is a product. It is a raw material that we're in desperate need of. Now, it is also a challenging one because we've got radiation. We've got all kinds of TDS, all these solids that are in there that we got to separate out. But it's not a challenge that can be unmet. It's one that we need to invest our energy and time into. We need to work together as a region, the same way Lubbock's being a good player with the rural communities. Us and Midland have to partner together to solve this problem for the Permian Basin. And we have all of the tools there, but we've got to find a way to bring it together for this solution, because desalination of water from this brine water is our only solution, in my opinion.
And along those lines, the legislature, one session ago, started funding a group, and I think it includes people from UTB, up at Texas Tech, that is looking at produced water. And it's oil and gas produced, but it's also CAFO produced, the confined animal feeding lots. So they're looking at a lot of different things. And now they say, well, we know we can do it. The science is there. The chemistry is there. It's just that we got to do it more than 1 bottle a day.
Well, and along
make a big.
Yes, it has to be big. For it to work, it has to be on a large scale, and that's where we have to look at these public-private partnerships between local governments, the state government, even the feds as well. I know the SB 18, Senator Perry's been a champion of water issues since I was in the legislature down there, and I applaud what he's doing, and I think getting the state and the Water Development Board to have those funds to allocate for these types of projects, because we can't do it on our own. We are trying to. We allocated $10 million in our American Rescue Plan Act funds to our utility district in West Odessa to help them. That's a community that's similar to a Colonia. It qualifies in some metrics. According to the census, it's 25,000 people. In reality, it's at least 70,000 people. These are the folks that don't want to be counted on a census. They're out there for a reason. But then we also have folks down south of us in Pleasant Farms. They truck in their water. And a lot of them were essentially screwed over by developers who didn't do any hydrology studies. They didn't do anything. And so we as a county have actually created a whole new division, a planning and development division, that has actually enforced what's already on the state books that counties can enforce, that you have to do the hydrology study before you go do this. But people are told, oh, there's water there, you're fine.
And there are developers telling people when they buy their land, they can drill a well and use all the water they want. And now we have 1.2 billion mortgages in Lubbock with people who are on wells that are going to go dry in 5 years, at the most 15. And it's $1.2 billion of mortgages. People will walk away from it if they don't have water, because they're not going to be able to get it from the city, not as individuals. So I think the development community needs to be in this and playing a role.
The innovation has to be there, and we have to call on our private partners, call on our industry partner, call on our educational partners. And I know the UTBB here is working on these types of things, and Texas Tech is as well. But we can't do it on our own with our budgets, and we want these things to happen. And we're, the city of Odessa right now is looking at privatizing their current system because the funding isn't there. Staffing these facilities is a challenge. Who really goes into that business anymore, and who can fund those positions, and competing with oil and gas positions. So it's very much a challenging puzzle to put this whole thing together. But we have great stewards here in the Permian Basin, and all of our partners in the oil and gas industry, and they're working on this. Some have approached me about these types of projects. We're not close to there yet. They have them, and they've been done on small models. Hey, we can desalinate in a few gallons a day. Well, that's great, but that's not going to solve what we're doing. And how big does this have to be to really solve the problem?
And now that the disposal is becoming an issue, because the earthquakes are related to the disposal, and there's a publication coming out. Excuse me.
Which is also
Bureau
a
of
concern with
Economic
the water infrastructure, our pipelines, because that's one thing we still don't know. We have line breaks all the time during freezes, but the one that happened was in June, in the middle of summer. Where did that happen? Why did that happen? We've seen a series of relatively large earthquakes. I've had midstream companies from the industry who have approached me and said, do you have an emergency management plan for one of our crude oil lines breaking, or natural gas lines breaking, or all ththese other things? I'm like, what plans do you have? How do we know how to deal with this? And we don't have those plans, and it's one that we're tasked, and we're working with Department of Homeland Security and a lot of other folks. I mean, there's a recent publication or a movie produced by guys on how to attack pipelines.
Yeah.
And so we could see enviro groups or whoever else is against the industry who are just going to go after these things. And you have a break in a natural gas line or any of your raw product, we're having a huge environment. These groups that support the environment are the ones that can actually really hurt us the most. So it's sorry to interrupt, but the earthquakes that's the dual concern there. We're shooting the water in the ground, causing these earthquakes, and then we're risking our pipeline infrastructure that is not set up for this.
But I think we need to recognize that the problems in Texas with water are beyond what you're seeing in the Permian Basin. Yes, they've done a tremendous job, and I applaud Senator Perry for creating the Produced Water Consortium and for specifically putting money in Senate Bill 28 for desalination. That alone doesn't solve Texas's problems. Senate Bill 28 goes a long way to get there. Senate Bill 28 also calls for desalination of marine water and brackish groundwater. We have a ton of it in Texas that we could and should be developing. It's going to cost money. And again, I want to go back and refocus on the disadvantaged communities, the ones that don't have the wherewithal to compete. The rural community that their well's going to go dry in 15 years and nobody is doing anything about it. The colonia that Omar is trying to help that can't get first-time water to themselves. All of rural Texans that are under a groundwater conservation district, that its desired future condition is a continuous decline of the aquifer. Those are real issues. Those are issues that all Texans will have to live with. The fact that you're trying to pursue a reservoir, it takes 30 years, if you're lucky, to get one, and it is not the most efficient thing to construct. We need to focus on how is it that we can utilize the water we have today in a more efficient way.
And it has to do more than just dumping dollars into the problem. Our workforce continues to be the biggest issue that Texas is facing currently. Recently, the Texas Water Foundation held a statewide survey, a workforce survey, and a lot of the problems that they encountered is that our water workforce is aging. We have a rapidly retiring workforce, and not a lot of youth, like you mentioned, are interested in joining the water world. And so in addition to getting support from the state, from the delegations and Congress at the federal level, we need to also focus at a local level at attracting that workforce we need that has the salaries that can compete against the energy industry, and other more attractive industries. Water is sexy. I consider that's why I joined this. That's why I'm here, right?
A lot of people don't think so, though.
It's
But
fascinating.
salary is an issue because Lubbock has trained person after person after person in the water industry, and they go to Phoenix and make twice as much money.
Well, and I don't want to cut y'all off. This conversation has obviously been way too sexy and too good. I would like to invite our audience now to go ahead. If y'all have any questions, we do have microphones right here in the aisles on either side. We would love to hear what y'all would like to ask our panelists now.
I've got one question. I appreciated the talking about leaks and how much leaks out of the system and how many times you can fill up AT&T Stadium with that. But that's meaningless to me. It's interesting math and a funny figure to carry around. But what is the loss in terms of percentage of our in Texas? We use X gallons. I don't know what that is. How much of it are we losing in leakage? Is that 0.5%? Is that 10% of our water going out to leakage? And kind of a follow-up to that is, are there particular areas where it's worse? I'm sure it's not a constant number all the way across.
It is not a constant number all the way across. I really appreciate your question. Because it isn't a constant number all the way across, you will have some entities that lose 10% of the treated water, or they think they're losing it, because if you can't measure it, you can't fix it. And so we need to have a serious discussion of how effectively are we measuring it. But just accepting that, some of them can be 10% or less, some of them can be 40% or greater, which is horrible. Texas, there was a study that was published by the Living Waters Project, 572,000 gallons, I believe, of water are being lost every year in Texas. I believe that's the number they came up with. Enough water for 4 major cities in Texas. Every drop has to count. And I'm gonna turn your question a little bit. If you have a community that accepts 10% as being okay, 15% line loss is being okay, because I'm good with 90. That's good. That got, 90% would get me through college, right? I'm going to turn it around on you. That 10% that you're failing to go after, but then you're turning around and trying to get water from Omar at another part of the state. That should not be occurring. You should first recognize the value of the water that you have, because the cheapest water you'll find is the one you already have. Take care of it. Omar, I don't know if you want to add to that.
That's a tough question. That's a tough question to follow up. Now, one of the biggest challenges in calculating how much water we're losing per community, every community has a water story, as I said before. And so leakage in one area of the state is different, and it's treated differently. Leakage in, for example, East Texas really means aquifer recharge in a lot of situations. There, especially in where areas like in the Austin area and the Hill Country, where you have continuous leakage, continuous seepage from rain, stormwater, things like that, it's an aggregate system. So your aquifer gets recharged. Now, it's always more cost effective to fix your leakage, so that the water, when you need it, gets to where it needs to. But it's difficult to quantify because stormwater, treated wastewater or effluent, everything's in the mix. So it's really hard for you to pinpoint exactly where the losses are. In my community, out in the middle of the desert, when we see green and nobody's irrigating it, that's a leakage. It's very easy to run LiDAR on top and be able to see it. Okay, let's fix it there. I can't imagine that same thing happening in Hill Country or in East Texas.
Yeah. But it's true, the Hill Country aquifer is different, and it's open to recharge fast, whereas the Ogallala aquifer does not recharge fast. And so it does depend on where your water's coming from.
But I still go back to you produce the water, you treated it, you put it out. If your system is leaking, start there.
Yeah.
So we have some questions from those who are viewing online. How should the price of water be structured without a base to charge enough for future maintenance? Who should pay for the water being used?
That's an interesting question. Something funny, well, it wasn't funny, occurred in Austin during the drought of 2011. It caught all of us by surprise. I tell you, when I was commissioner of TCQ during that time, and we were having to respond to senior calls for water, which we had never gotten outside of a water master area, and we had to curtail water rights. And communities were being placed on the 180-day list. That means that based on current utilization, 180 days from now, that whole city is not going to have water. Then it's a serious issue, right? The question that has come up during that process is, how is it that we're structuring our rates? Austin asked its users during the beginning stages of the drought to conserve water because the Highland Lakes were dropping precipitously. They had already curtailed agricultural use downstream. They asked users to curtail 10%. Austinites responded in a phenomenal way.
Yep.
We ended up conserving 25%. Not 10 that we were asked, 25. Here's the strange thing that happened. We were all proud of the fact that we found ways to conserve and use less water, change how we're using water. The utility found that their base rate at a sale that was 25% less water wasn't sufficient to meet their fixed costs. So as a reward for conserving water, our rates went up. That's the value of what you should be paying. You need to really understand what your fixed costs are.
Question is, how should local jurisdictions handle the condition where there are thought to be lots of small leaks and deteriorating infrastructure relative to boil water notices for communities at risk for drinking contaminated water?
So something that we have going on is our early detection system, and I think that's what we're seeing through a lot of these folks is we're able to get to those leaks, and this was the catastrophic leak was one that they identified very quick, but the valve again was part of it, and then also the unique nature. It was a 7-foot long hairline fracture that spiraled, and I didn't take fluid dynamics. My little brother did at this university, and he could probably tell me why. But I don't know if what all went into that. But I think the early detection, getting out there, having a plan in a way in which if there's a leak on line O or line P, and you identify the locations that you shut it down, you get to it quick, and you knock it out. I think that's, in my mind, from a governance standpoint, how I would do it.
Now, one of the things that we have not really talked about is the synergy between infrastructure. So in El Paso, one of the things we're doing as we are renovating I-10, we're taking a closer look at the existing pipes, water, wastewater, and tapping into U.S. Department of Transportation dollars, where the real money's at, to fix a lot of those lines. And so as we are looking for leaks, we need to take advantage. Anytime we're repairing a road, anytime we're building a new connection, we're repairing our aging infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, which in this region you all do often enough because of the energy sector. It's a perfect opportunity for you to also take a look at your water and wastewater lines and repair them if needed, or make them more resilient. Perhaps they're still going to be good for the next 20 years, but maybe you want to add an additional layer to be able to make them last 50 years.
And we're doing that in Lubbock also, and at the same time, finding places where we can collect the stormwater, get it into the system, and then use it as drinking water. And I know in Lubbock, we had a leak in our large pipe from Lake Meredith and Roberts County that went all the way down the line. So it affected Amarillo, everybody in West Texas. And it happened at Christmas. The line blew. I mean, it really blew. It's amazing to see the photos. There were over 24 people that worked 24 hours a day for 3 weeks to learn how to repair that. And when they repaired it, within a day, another one showed up 2 miles down the line. So they repaired that. So then they put the money into checking the whole line, learning how to repair them. They came up with a real quick way to repair. But the thing that saved everybody, and the reason there was nothing in the news, is everybody along the line had 3 to 4 weeks of water in storage in their systems. And so they could get through a leak without a boil notice.
And yeah, we have time for one more question and then a hopefully quick answer.
I didn't have a question. I wanted to make a comment. I started my water career in 1974. So a lot of y'all were just clouds at that time. But most of my career in water, I was involved with the Texas Water and Bill Board. I was on the Texas Municipal Utility Association committees. And most of that trending was to regionalize systems, to large systems and large treatment plants. A lot of our answer and our quick answer, once we can make public accept it, is by recycling of our wastewater plants. And so municipalities that have gone and put their infrastructure, you were talking about the symmetry of your capital investment. A lot of the capital investment has been going in your transport instead of the treatment. So if we move from the centralized concept back to a more localized, smaller treatment concept closer to the source of the water and recycle it on those sources rather than send it to a major plant, we can become very efficient. If we were to recycle our wastewater, we could increase our utility water supply by about 60% and never leave town. All that, and secondly, the cost of that increase is $0 because the wastewater bill pays for that water treated. And so if that water is recycled back into the system, well, that certainly helps Aunt Matilda's water bill, and it certainly changes your capital investment. And the key is public conception. You're talking about the EDAP program and things of that nature. I've been very blessed in my career to work with very smart people and have opportunity to do a lot of things. In fact, I wrote the model management plan for the EDAP program for the Texas Water Development Board. I don't remember when it was, 2000, somewhere around there. And I got to work with some of those EDAP programs. That was a very good work. But that is one major source. Of course, they mentioned produced water. And produced water is probably, you're looking at probably 9 billion barrels a year in Texas. And I mean, more than that, that's probably in just the Permian. And
16.
In 2012, I set aside, I was retired, so I've spent since 2012, working up a process and patented some product. I don't want to get into that, but produced water can be recycled back. Primarily, the best use, of course, is agriculture, and I think the TCEQ is going to allow us to inject that in the groundwater, and definitely we're going to be able to put that in streams now through legislation. So.
Jayme,
The encouragement I would say was everybody just keep on trucking, and all these your leak detections, all those things, you've got to concentrate on those. But that water source is recycled. In all of nature, we have a hydrologic cycle, and we have this other cycle that we can take care of that. That was just the comments I wanted to make.
I was going to say, that's why Lubbock has that chain of lakes, because they put their treated water in chain lakes and grab it out again. And there is some evaporation, but it's also treatment along the way.
And sir, I agree with you. Conveyance is one of the most troublesome water problems that we have. Maybe we need to have desalination plants everywhere. Small scale, as the technology becomes cheaper, small scale desalination plants. That could be the future of colonias.
In 1996, there was a engineering department at UTEP developed a home desalination so that the colonias could have clean water.
I do have one last question, if we can, because I think it's helpful for everyone here. This person asks, what's the single and kind of most immediate action Texans can take to address water infrastructure in their communities?
Make water sexy again.
Right now, look, we're 20 days away from sine die. That means the legislature goes home. This has been one of the best water legislative sessions I have seen in my entire career. But bills are still being considered. They have not yet been adopted. There are phenomenal bills that Senate Bill 28, it's not over the finish line yet. It's close. We need to get it. We need to get it over. We need to get the Technical Assistance Consortium bill. We need to get the Safe Harbor bill across so that we can then have bigger utilities help colonial issues without the enforcement action coming back on them. There is House Joint Resolution 169 that would provide continuous sources of funding for our water issues. Get on the phone, call your elected official in Austin, tell them to get these bills over the crossing.
I think that's a great note to end on. You guys, this has been a fantastic conversation, and I love hearing so much energy about water. Of course, I want to Yeah, I want to thank our panelists for joining us, and then, of course, for all of y'all joining us here and then virtually for watching as well. The Tribune is a nonprofit news organization, and we rely on support from folks like you. If you value our events and our journalism, and you want to also maybe help Omar make water sexy and continue our coverage, please join and be a member of the Texas Tribune at texastribune.org/donate. Thank y'all.